This is Rob Laubach from the SOMA Institute in Chicago, Illinois. My video today is going to focus on sports massage. The sports massage that I'm going to show you today is going to focus primarily on lower back and lower extremity, so legs. The stretches that I'm going to show you are things that you would want to do post-activity. If you have an athlete or just a client that needs stretching, before an activity, they want to do dynamic stretching. They want to be moving while they're warming up muscles. So the stretches that I'm going to show you today are really for post-activity. They've started to cool down. The muscles are already kind of probably tight and shortened. So these particular stretches are to help lengthen the muscle and kind of get it back to its normal resting length. So let's start with adductor muscles. How to stretch adductors. So we know adductors are basically on this medial side of the thigh, right? Running from around the pubic bone down to the medial side of the knee. So there's different ways that you can stretch the adductors, and I'm going to show you all three. First one, and again, if I'm trying to stretch my adductors, I'm going to be moving the body into abduction or abduction. Now, with this first one, for it purely to be stretching the adductors, you need to keep this toe towards the ceiling. All right? So I'm going to come underneath the client's ankle, and I'm going to bring them out so that I can step into this space here. I want to make sure that I have this leg braced, and I can even use my thigh here as I walk the leg further out. And I'm going to just slowly bring this into abduction. I'm going to ask my client when he feels that stretch. Have him take a couple of nice deep breaths in. And again, when you get to a stretch, you do want to hold it for a good 2 or 3 breaths. Let that muscle, adapt to what's going on. Let it lengthen. And then I can slowly come back out of that stretch. Now that's one way to stretch adductors. Now the other thing you have to remember is people are going to have just varying degrees of flexibility. So one stretch is going to be felt by someone where that same stretch might not be felt by someone else. So at times you have to adapt what you're doing for those degrees of flexibility. So another way to stretch adductors is to place the leg into a figure 4. So I'm going to lift the leg and place it across that leg, just above the patella. And then I want to hold this opposite side, ASIS, down and push down on this knee. And I'll ask my client when he feels that stretch in his adductors. Okay. Have him take a couple of nice deep breaths in. Now for your body, another position for the therapist, you can even turn and hold in this position if that's easier for you. One last way that you can stretch the adductors, again I'm going to bring the leg off the table. Just make sure that the client doesn't have any maybe particular knee issues. But I can start by bringing the leg out into abduction and then flex the knee. So now that leg is hanging down. Again, I can use my thigh and I can pull these two apart. A couple of nice deep breaths in. And I'm going through this at this pace so that you can maybe hopefully follow along with me as you're practicing these stretches. Then after you let that stretch go, just make sure that the client isn't helping you at all. So you're in charge. You bend down and you bring that leg back up for the client. All right, calf muscles back here. Obviously, gastrocnemius and soleus can get very tight with any activity. So we know that gastroc is a plantar flexor, right? They point the toes away from the head. So I want to bring the ankle into dorsiflexion to get a really nice stretch of those calf muscles. Nice way to do that is to just put the heel of their foot or their shoe in your hand. Place their toes or the toe of the shoe on your forearm. And I'm just going to walk my body forward, and using my body weight, I'm going to lunge forward and bring their toes towards their head. And I'm just still leaning forward. I'm going to wait for my client to let me know when he feels that stretch. There it is. Taking a couple of deep breaths in, getting a nice stretch of those calf muscles right now. And then we'll come out of that. All right, for hamstrings. Hamstrings are on the posterior side of the thigh. They run from the ischial tuberosity down to the medial and lateral side of the knee. A couple ways to do hamstrings. I'm going to go back to this leg, and instead of keeping the toes pointed at the ceiling, I'm actually going to externally rotate the leg. Okay, so now I'm not so concerned with the adductors as I am with the hamstrings. So I'm going to bring this out, and this is more of a stretch for those semis, semitendinosus, semimembranosus. I still want to stabilize this leg. Again, I am turned out though, foot is not towards the ceiling. And bring this out. And hopefully get a good stretch of those medial hamstring muscles. Good. He's got a nice stretch. A couple of nice deep breaths in. And you know that hamstrings are a flexor of the knee, so that knee has to be straight. That knee has to be straight. I'm going to walk that back in nice and slow. Now, the stretch that we all kind of know for hamstrings is I'm going to bring his hip into flexion. But again, I want to keep that knee nice and straight. Another thing you might want to also consider, you know, legs are long. And if you are working with a client who is very tall, it might require you to actually get on the table with the client. Don't be afraid to do that. But again, I need to keep that knee nice and straight. So keeping that knee straight, I'm going to walk their leg forward, and if I need to, I'll just kind of walk my knees forward so that I can bring that leg up. He's got a nice stretch. He's going to give me a couple of good deep breaths in. So a couple of nice ways to get those hamstring muscles. And just try to be as fluid with your movements as possible. As you bring the leg down, it might be a nice thing to just bend the knee and then bring the leg back down into that position as it's laying on the table. Now let's do a chiral roll. This is going to be really nice for the low back. So I'm going to have my client move towards this side of the table. So you're going to come towards me. All right. And what I'm going to do is have him let that arm just kind of hang. I'm going to bend this knee and cross it over. So what am I trying to, my target here is the low back. I might get a little bit of glutes. I might get some of the IT band as well. But I need to hold this shoulder down. So I'm going to hold this shoulder down as I bring this across like this. He needs to be right next to you. How's that? A little bit more. Okay, so he's got a nice stretch. Now, somebody may not feel this stretch as much as, you know, someone else. So an option here is to actually extend this leg out. Keep the knee straight, roll him forward, but then use your leg. You're going to put your leg up here. Bring this and move him into that even more. How's that? Okay. So use your body here. You can actually use your body to help you. You should not be struggling with these stretches. They should be nice and easy for you to perform on the client. And again, we'll kind of unroll that a little bit. Bring this leg back over. Now let's do one more nice stretch like that. So I'm going to have my client move just a little bit more back towards the center. Now there's a little coordination that goes with this, and I'm going to be walking around the head of the table here. Okay? So I'm going to move my client into lateral flexion. So he's going to relax, and I'm just going to pull him towards me. I've got him into lateral flexion. Without letting go of that arm, I'm just going to walk him across like this. And I'm going to reach over, bring this shoulder towards me, but again, for me to really not have to struggle here, I'm going to put my forearm behind his scapula. My other hand is going to be on his ASIS. I'm going to push and pull him towards me. Just let me know. How's that? Take a couple of nice deep breaths in, and again, I'm just really pulling back on this forearm, but I'm trying to keep the hip in place. And as they exhale, you know, you can possibly move into that stretch even a little bit deeper on exhalations. And then slowly let the client come out of that. And just kind of put their arm back down, kind of bring them back to the center. And then you can move on to your next stretch. So a nice technique for the QL muscle, or the Quadratus Lumborum, right? It's located right here in the low back between your iliac crest and your 12th rib. So I'm going to be using my forearm. And basically what I'm going to do, the client needs to be close to the side of the table like he is. You're going to use your forearm that is closest to their head, not the one closest to the feet. You're going to have your forearm supinated first. Okay, so I'm going to just slide my hand, supinate it, slide my forearm under the body. When I have it in place, you notice my fingers are over here, I'm going to pronate. I'm going to turn my hand down. My hand is on the padding now, and I'm going to use my forearm as a lever, and I'm going to just pull up. You can see how the client is sort of bending, and that should be a nice QL focused stretch. How's that? Take a couple of nice deep breaths in, and again, my forearm is just a lever here. It's just a lever. You might even have your client, they might have a small adjustment when you do this stretch. All right. So then I'm going to ask my client, we're still focusing on legs. I'm going to ask my client, so you may have noticed those were stretches for the posterior side of the lower extremities, hamstrings, calves, for example. So I'm going to have my client turn over into prone so that I can focus more on anterior muscle groups like the quadriceps and hip flexors. Again, degrees of flexibility will determine what stretch is best for your client. So let's start with quadriceps, right? This huge group right here, big knee extenders. So I'm going to flex the knee. I want to keep that leg close to the center of the table and just simply bring their heel towards their glutes. I'm going to ask my client to let me know when they feel that stretch in the front of their leg. Now again, some people may not feel this stretch. Okay, he gave me a thumbs up, so he is feeling that in the front of his thigh on those quads. Again, you might have somebody who is very, very flexible. They're not going to feel this stretch at all. So we're going to add on another element to it. So I'm going to come out of this. And then hip flexors, right? Hip flexors are always usually tight. Hip flexors, psoas, iliacus. We're sitting in positions like this all day, so those tend to get very, very tight. So I want to bring the hip into extension. A couple of ways to do it. You can bring your leg up onto the table with the client, the leg closest to their feet. I'm going to lift up their leg and place it right on my thigh. So now I already have the hip in some slight extension. Now I want to hold that hip down because as I start to bring this forward, their hips start to tilt away from me, and I don't want that to happen. So I can make a fist and lean down into that glute. I'm holding that hip into place. And then I'm going to add this first element that we started with back on. I'm going to ask my client to let me know. Okay, he's got a good stretch there. So nice extension of that hip to stretch out the hip flexors. Take a deep breath in. And notice how I'm really using my body wisely. I'm not straining, I'm not struggling to do any of these stretches. Now, one last variation on that hip flexor. Instead of putting your knee up here, if you don't want to do that, you can have your knee off the table and just have their knee in your hand. Same thing though, I do want to hold this hip down. So I can hold that hip down, and instead I'm tilting forward. I'm not lifting with my shoulder. I'm leaning my whole body forward, and I can usually get that a little bit higher too, off of my thigh, or instead of using my thigh. How's that? Okay, take a couple of deep breaths in. And we'll bring that back down. Okay. Now, one last thing I want to cover today with regards to sports massage. During a sports massage, your client might start to cramp. Okay? Their hamstrings, for example, start to cramp. They are still dehydrated, any number of reasons that they might cramp. They've just run a marathon, whatever. So there's a technique, a style of technique called PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. And so the idea behind this is, if the hamstrings are starting to cramp, they're spasming, they're tight, I want to shut the hamstrings off. I want to get rid of that, that contraction. So what do I want to do? I want them to move in the opposite direction. So we know that hamstrings are a knee flexor, right? A knee flexor. So if my client is starting to have a cramp in their hamstrings, I want them to move their knee into extension, but it has to be against my resistance. So let's say my client started cramping while they're getting a sports massage. I know it's in the hamstrings. I'm going to get into a position where I can brace myself, and I'm going to ask my client, if you would, go ahead with just about 25% of your strength. Push into me this way. Go ahead. And so right now, a little bit more, he's turning on his quadriceps on the front because he's trying to extend his knee. These hamstrings are nice and loose. That'll allow those hamstrings to relax.